Okay, if you're a Kenyan, put down your hand. Let's be fair. What country? Huh? Zimbabwe. Okay, yes. What country? Nigeria. Ghana. No, Kenyans, put down your hand. Nigeria. Okay. Mauritius. And what's the impact of it? How has it changed lives? Are you using it for other things apart from banking? Is it being used for pay bills, airtime, send money? Okay. So I think there's going to be something interesting talking about the digital divide and what access to data can do, because that is going to be the big link. And I can see the panel already. So here to take us through the next panel is Miss Dina Sherif. Are you ready, Dina? I think has the gender balance broken up again?
No, we're missed. They're here.
They're here? You sure?
We're just going to invite them all up. Come on.
Okay, so come up and then we'll quickly, and she'll invite you once she's seated. So round of applause for Ms. Dina Sherif from Egypt, who's going to be running the next panel.
Okay, so thank you everybody for staying to the end of the day. I know we're the only panel standing between you and cocktails and dinner, but I would love to give you a round of applause for sticking it through, so well done. We do have a great panel with us today. I'm not going to read everybody's bios in the interest of time, but we do have Her Excellency Paula Ingabire, who is the Minister of ICT and Innovation in Rwanda. Thank you for taking the time. We know that you're tight on schedule as well. We have Dr. Shahid Mahmud from Pakistan, who is an EF Fellow and a Trustee, and the CEO of Interactive Group in Pakistan and one of the leaders of technology in Pakistan. To my right, we have Miss, I'm going to pronounce this wrong, I know, Adedoyin. I think I did it okay. Odunfa from Nigeria, who's the CEO of Digital Jewels. And we have Mauro Rebelo from Brazil, who is a professor at the University of Rio de Janeiro and also a scientist and entrepreneur. And last but definitely not least, we have Juan Güemes from the IE Business School. He's the VP for Economic Affairs at the IE University and chairman of the Entrepreneurship and Innovation Center in Spain. I think this is the first panel, not only that has a relative gender balance, that actually does have a gender balance, but also geographical balance, because we have Africa, we have Asia, we have Latin America, we have Europe. So I think that's a good way to start. So just very quickly, I want to ask the audience a question. How many people, by show of hands, have a smartphone with them today?
2, 3.
Who doesn't have, right? So another question, how many people have used their smartphone today to send a WhatsApp, an iMessage, check Facebook, make a tweet? Raise your hands high. I think everybody has. So I think the point I wanted to make is that while it may seem that having access to the internet and technology is something that is very accessible, it's actually not. And we're still facing a digital divide that I think can compromise the future of Africa if it's not overcome. So Africa today still has the highest digital divide in terms of rural-urban access, but also in terms of male-female access. So, Your Excellency, I would love to start with you, and I'll ask all the panelists to keep your comments brief and to also jump in when you would like to respond. But Your Excellency, I'd love to start with you, and I know that Rwanda has made huge strides in terms of integrating technology and ICT into everything in Rwanda, and it's now seen as one of the leaders in technology in Africa, and I know that Rwanda has often said that it wants to become the digital hub, and His Excellency the President this morning actually said, well, I think we're getting there. I'd love to hear your thoughts on what the digital divide means for Rwanda, and also what you think would be the fate of Africa if we did not overcome that divide.
Thank you. I think maybe I should start off by saying our vision has expanded from simply thinking Rwanda will be the digital hub for Africa, but thinking Africa will be the digital hub for the continent.
Yeah.
Just to be very brief, given that we're time constrained, and I know we'll have some disagreements like we already did earlier before on the panel, but I truly believe that digital technologies are going to underpin the SDGs. We have a conference that is happening right next door on SDGs, but when you start to think about poverty reduction, access to healthcare, quality education, you start to see how digital technologies are going to be fundamental in responding to that. And UN classifies internet as a basic need. And so many of the countries, including developing countries, we need to be very deliberate about how we make sure that internet access is accessible for everyone. And your question about the digital divide and what it means, I think not just for Rwanda, but for the continent at large, you see the digital divide in different facets or aspects. One is the divide between men and women, how many, the proportion of those that have access to technologies and those that do not. You see the digital divide when you talk about rural and urban populations. You also see the digital divide on the continent when you think about, do people with disabilities have access to technology? And what are we doing to make sure that they are included into this digital journey that we are going on as a continent? And lastly, as we think futuristically or as we go ahead, we start to think of another form of digital divide that is going to be around security, cybersecurity, which is really going to translate in the ability for individuals, countries, businesses to have the resources and skills to be able to protect their digital lives and those that are not able to do so. And so I truly believe that there are certain factors that are very fundamental to driving, to closing the digital divide gap. And one of them is access. We'll talk about it later. The other one is skills, digital literacy, not just looking at basic literacy, but also digital literacy skills. The other one looking at content in the local language, which really is essential to driving uptake of the kind of access that we provide as governments. And so for me, I feel like if we can tackle those three areas, and also the last one would be affordability of smart devices. So if you're able to tackle those four things, then you're able to bridge the digital divide that we see across the continent, but also for Rwanda very specifically.
So if I could just follow up in specific in terms of policies that are needed right now, what do you think is the most important policy that Rwanda is driving now to actually address some of these divides?
For us, the very first was really thinking about universal access. How do we make sure that everyone has access to connectivity? And that meant, government putting in place a universal access fund that was going to really address those gaps for those communities that might necessarily not make sense for telecom companies. There's no business sense. The purchasing power is not there. So how do you put in place resources that are going to make sure that you have inclusive access to digital infrastructure? Then the other one was to say, if you are attracting the private sector to make some investments, how do you incentivize them? And so we had to put in place an infrastructure sharing policy that allows for the different operators to share the infrastructure and also lowers the cost of driving further access. And then we could go into details of then when it came to digital literacy, how low was it and what are some of the interventions that we had to put in place. But I think for us, a fundamental aspect was how we put in place access for most of the Rwandans across the country.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
So Adedoyin, I'm going to come to you because Nigeria is also a very interesting case, not just because of the size of your population, but I think we know that Nigeria is also thinking very carefully about the digital divide through telecom access, but also internet access, but the gap between urban and rural access is still quite large. And I'd love to hear from your perspective what is happening in Nigeria, but also I know that you also have very particular views specifically on the gender divide and how to overcome that.
Thank you, Dina, and it's my pleasure to be here. So in Nigeria, we have an interesting story where we've seen teledensity sort of grow in leaps and bounds from 1999, when we probably had about 4,000 fixed lines and less than 400,000 fixed lines and less than 200,000 people with internet access, So today, where we have about 165 million at the last count, people, tele-density-wise, for a population of just under 200 million, and internet access is just about 50%. And this has had a huge ripple effect on the economy and on the quality of lives. But 50% internet access, there's clearly a lot of room, for improvement. And the question then becomes, so why haven't we been able to increase that? And the number of barriers that I think affect us in Nigeria and many other African countries. I mean, the network infrastructure is common. In Nigeria, we've probably got about 20 terabytes of data in our submarine cable system sitting at the shore, and we have inadequate internet access domestically because we have a real challenge with the last mile and right of way. So being able to bring all the huge capacity that has been installed through about 5 different submarine cables, public sector, private sector investments of over hundreds of thousands of dollars, and being able to make them available to the average citizen, especially in the rural areas, is a huge challenge. Being able to lay the fiber optic cables has been a challenge for us. There are issues around the cost, there are issues around security, there are issues around chronic vandalism, and these are all big issues that must be tackled. A number of private investors have put quite a lot of money down, but it must be patient capital because the estimate is that it may take up to 30 years to get the return on investment. So from an infrastructure point of view, I think we're pretty clear what the problem is, and we're pretty clear what the solutions could be. The solutions are just not moving as fast as they should. Now, but it's not just infrastructure. There are issues also, as the minister mentioned, about literacy. And so in Nigeria, we just have now about 50% literacy level, but the gender disparity there is huge. So 40% for women and about 60% for men. That's a 20% divide. That therefore translates to everything digital. Because if we look at the number of women with bank accounts, the number of women who have financial empowerment, it all sort of adds up. Somebody was saying to me the other day that on their payroll list, they see names that don't belong to their staff. And she asked why. And she was told that some of the women who are members of staff don't have bank accounts. And so they have to use other people's names. Now think about the economic cost of that, of not being able to access your own funds. And, so this trickles down. But on the gender divide issue, we all know that there are many benefits in terms of diverse workforces. In Nigeria and in many African countries, women are still vastly underrepresented in terms of the digital space and even in STEM-related roles. And the problems, again, are well known. The solutions are well known. It's really just about now sitting together to try and make sure that those things happen, make sure that there's more mentoring for young girls to realize that a lot of them, I was reading a statistic the other day that said 50% of the poorest girls in Nigeria are not in school by the age of 6. But their male siblings are in school, and they generally get a larger percentage of the housework and all of the things that distract them. So those are the issues that affect women, females, in the gender divide. The other problem with internet access, apart from literacy, is around content, the development of content. So even when there is access, what are we accessing? And related to that again is, what are the rights of the people who are on the internet? So we can work very hard, and we can increase those numbers of internet penetration from 50% to maybe 80%. The question then will be, what kind of content is being accessed, and how do we protect the rights? I mean, in the EU now, you've got the GDPR. Love it or hate it, it gives you some kind of framework to work within for the rights of data, for the rights of privacy for people. What are we doing in Africa? I see a lot of very, very disparate initiatives towards privacy, but it would be nice to have a cohesive response as well, to say if we are all planning to bridge this digital divide and get a lot of our people empowered through the digital technologies, how then do we take care of their privacy? Do we have to wait until we've created that problem to start to tackle it, or is it something for us to think about as we are tackling that problem? I'll stop there for now.
A lot of what you said resonates with me because I'm Egyptian and we also have a lot of girls out of school, and which is standing a big barrier to also access to not only the intranet, but also a wide range of other opportunities for women moving forward. So Shahid, I'd love to switch to you because I know that you've been a huge driving force in Pakistan when it comes to, you need a mic, don't you?
No,
or you have one, okay.
When
it,
the digital divide.
Right. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on what difference technology has made to the Pakistani people, specifically access to internet, because you've been a huge driving force behind that. How has this impacted the actual livelihood of the Pakistani people?
Before I start, I must congratulate and acknowledge the Eisenhower Fellows, especially in Rwanda and in Africa, who've been able to put this together because I strongly believe that, and I'm an engineer as the first profession, so let me just take 2 minutes to set the perspective on how I think, and then I think we can have this debate further. So digital divide coming as a session right after Future of Works is a very interesting position. And then that too sitting in a forum which is in Africa. And when I say as an engineer, I look at numbers. So we increasing the world population by 1 billion people every 12 years. We will be 11 billion people by the 21st century. 40% of those people will be in Africa. 42 will be in Asia. So 82% of the world will be in these two continents, whereas North America and Europe together will be about 10%. So automatically the digital divide and the world perspective will change because of the way we look at the distribution of population. So when you are lagging in something as fundamental as the digital technology, I will not limit it to just comms and data and internet, but the digital technology world, it is mandatory that we look at it at the pace at which it is developing. Now, when we talk about the pace, this is where a lot of fundamental mistakes are being done because, not because the technocrats do not understand, but the things are happening at a pace which is very difficult for the human to grasp, for which you need to be looking at the future and then calculating it back. Now, let me explain that. So every 12 months to 18 months, we are doubling the processing power. We are doubling the bandwidth, broadband speed, 5G now coming in. We are also doubling the storage capacity. By virtue of storage and by virtue of 1 billion being added every 12 years, you are developing that much more content, and we're developing content at a pace of a couple of zettabytes on a annual basis. So this is where the real world is. Now in this infrastructure, when you talk about the digital divide, in Pakistan we introduced, like in Nigeria, mobile communications in the analog in the late 89-90 time frame, 500,000, now we're over 160 million. It has revolutionized everything. But then I go back to some fundamentals, and this is the hard, and I'm very happy that we are the last panel because now I can connect the dots from the first panel to this panel, and then I can leave to the discussion. So the first panel was talking about how do we put Africa into position. The second panel was how do we attract investments, and then we went to Future of Works. The challenge here is that there will be, and this is as per the Millennium Project, the Pakistan Node chair is also here, Parush. According to the Millennium Project, studies done, 2050, there will be 3 billion people who will be self-employed. 3 billion. Out of the 6 billion who will be employed in the world. Now for those 3 billion, if there is a digital divide, and of that 3 billion, 40% are in Africa, we have a serious global problem. Therefore, investments will automatically come. Now the investments have to come in sequences. You cannot have a digital divide addressed unless and until you don't solve the following. If there is no electricity, that area is not going to work because technology does not work without electricity. How cheap you keep the technology, that is how smart your digital technology will be. If your power numbers are 34% of the expense of the generating of the technology, then it's not making sense. So alternate energy has to be the first thing, because unless and until you don't have that, especially in the areas where you have a population base, you're out. Okay? The other one is investments will automatically come. The question is, how do you position yourselves to invest in areas, especially with IoT, data, open data, and we can see it from the global companies. Today, no oil company is on top of the list as the number one companies in the world. The big four boys are Apple, Google, Facebook, and the likes. So if data is the future oil and AI is the future electricity, then the digital divide has to be taken in these steps. And this is exactly how we're looking at it in Pakistan.
Yeah. Very, very well said. But I have another follow-up question specifically to you, but also would love to also hear your thoughts too, because I also think the aspect that we don't talk about when it comes to technology and access is the impact that it can actually have on peace and prosperity, which are also core values of Eisenhower Fellowship. So specifically in regions like mine, which is the Middle East, where we have a lot of conflict, but also in areas in Asia where there's a lot of conflict, and even in Nigeria. How can solving the digital divide also simultaneously solve peace and conflict and a lot of the struggles that we have?
It is as humans what we keep as our perspective, right? You know, we can be from any region, we can be any ethnicity, we can be anybody, but if our basic core values are correct, then the current technology assists you in being fair, because with data, you cannot lie, and with a digital footprint, you have all the evidence. And if we are going towards the Earth's resources being depleted because of additional manpower, all the technology has to focus is how we replenish those resources in the best possible way. It addresses climate change, it addresses food security, it addresses everything else. But if you do not, as a nation, and this I can say very openly, and we're advocating this in Pakistan also, we as Africans, as Pakistanis or as Egyptians, if our governments do not encourage open data, open access, then I don't think we're going in the right direction.
I 100% agree. And I know you want to comment.
So for me, I'll say very quickly that I think digital can help to improve transparency in government, clearly, and that has a huge impact on peace and conflict. What we find in Nigeria, as in a lot of African regions, is that a lot of conflict is caused by misinformation. Now, if everybody was able to have, first of all, you have the data to show what exactly is going on, and you're able to get that information to people wherever they are. I mean, a lot of the news and updates and the information that we get is still very much centralized on the urban, in the urban areas. Imagine if everybody could get access to that and everybody could have a voice, then clearly I think that it'll have an impact.
Agreed. Mauro, I know you want to comment on this point.
Well, somehow they already commented. While we were thinking, I was thinking that we may have looked at the digital divide towards the people that are going to use, but there's also in governments, and it's not that they don't have access, but they don't make the decisions based on the data. And this is maybe not the divide that we are talking about, but it's a consequence that
it's cost we pay.
Yeah.
Yeah, but since you are talking, let me ask you a question. I think, Latin America and Africa actually have quite a bit in common in terms of access and equality of access. I would love for you to share with us what is happening in Brazil, but also Latin America, when it comes to bridging the digital divide. And I know that you think that the answer to digital divide is actually also technology itself.
Yes.
And also, I would love to hear your thoughts on how Africa as a continent and Latin America as a continent can also collaborate more closely together when it comes to technology, because I think Shahid's points are extremely important about how the world is shifting.
Yes.
And
but from what he said, we are not going to exist, right? So like 42% Asia, 40% Africa, 10% the rest, and then Latin America is not in
fell
your
through the cracks.
statistics. So I have a little experience with the digital divide in educational terms. So and one thing that you said struck me, because I know that in Brazil, we managed to reduce the divide a lot by giving tax benefits to the smartphones. So this came out in 2012 and has made a huge difference in how people access educational content in Brazil. So how many people could access educational content in Brazil. And I know that now most of the population are connected, but also in Brazil, most of the population are coming from the rural areas to live in the cities. So this, again, goes again to things that people have already said. And I don't know exactly what else can be done, because I still think that it goes back to what people were saying in the last panel. It's a matter of education, and I hate to say this because it's always very broad, like education will solve everything. But people still don't know what to ask to the technology. And I don't know if governments or other people will be able to tell them. So if we can count that someone else will teach you or tell you what to do. So I believe that...
But that's assuming that governments themselves understand what's happening in technology.
And that make decisions based on the data, because they don't. No, someone believes they know what they have to do, they don't look at the data, and then go on. So we will move towards people learning by themselves. And I believe that we are creating technology that can help us do that, and can help protect the rights, the rights of everyone, and the privacy of everyone, and the data of everyone. And blockchain is kind of evidence of this. This is already happening. And I would say that we are going to go more in this decentralized direction of to close the digital divide.
Right. So, Juan, I'm going to end with a question to you, and then I'll ask a couple of more follow-ups. But I also started a Center for Entrepreneurship at the American University in Cairo several years back, and I know from personal history that universities and centers for entrepreneurship and innovation, they're these huge places of hope and optimism, because we tell students you can go out there and you can solve every problem possible, and technology is going to help you, and we make it seem very, very easy and very doable. And in some cases it is. We do see great examples of young people who graduate from our business programs, who start businesses, who are solving serious and major problems. However, I always question whether we as educators and centers for entrepreneurship are really driving home the importance of the ethics behind scaling technology, and whether we're teaching the very students who are using these technologies to solve problems to ensure inclusive access to technology. So I'd love, the IE Business School is an elite business school in Spain, and I think you just launched the Africa Center there. I'd love to hear your thoughts on how universities are a critical component of ensuring access by what they do with their students, as we're telling them to go out there and start businesses to solve some of our most critical problems in healthcare, in education, in energy, and in a lot of sectors we've already discussed today.
Well, I think that entrepreneurs are already doing it everywhere. And if we look at what happened in the last years, for example, in financial inclusion, from 2011 to 2017, 1.2 billion people were financially included due to small startups providing solutions for remittance, for banking accounts, and they foster competition with legacy banks who never thought about including these 1.2 billion people. As an economist, I can't think of a bigger change in fighting poverty and poverty alleviation in the history of humankind. And all this was done by entrepreneurs. I mean, obviously governments and multilateral agencies have been working on giving microcredits and trying to promote financial inclusion since many years ago. But it happened because many entrepreneurs whose names we don't even know have been working on this. And if you look at the SDGs and all the challenges, all these old problems, you know, who have a pending solution since many years ago, you will find entrepreneurs providing new ways, innovative ways of solving these old problems. And think about not only financial inclusion, but education, for example. Now, you have available programs delivered by the best universities in the world through Coursera or Code Academy, and they're available for everyone, and even for free. If you don't need a certification, you can learn almost everything, and it is not been so easy to access to quality content ever than nowadays due to these platforms of education. You think about energy, for example, which was mentioned in one of the roundtables this morning. Not only digital technology, but a number of technologies that happen to have reached a point of maturity simultaneously nowadays are producing a huge change. They're completely changing the game. And when we look at these SDGs, these old problems, housing, energy, education, healthcare, for the first time in the history of human being, we can dream of a solution in our lifetime. This is something that is going to happen. It is in our hands, obviously, to foster, to trigger this change with politics such as the one you mentioned, with good governments, with transparency, with amazing leaders such as the ones were telling us this morning how they are promoting free trade and infrastructure in Africa. And one more thing, the key for entrepreneurs and for building a real business is identifying a huge problem. The bigger the problem, the bigger the business opportunity. So I'm asking you all, who has more chances of developing business models to tackle, to solve African needs? Someone based in Massachusetts or Stanford, or someone who's in the field, in the ground, and who knows exactly what are the problems and the needs of African people. So this is a huge opportunity also for Africa, and that's why I'm so optimistic.
Mm-hmm. Minister, did you want to respond to that?
Well, I think I just wanted to add one thing, because when you talk about entrepreneurship programs, you find that many of the entrepreneurs, what they're doing is the niche target market they're looking at is people that can afford, that have the willingness to pay, but also the ability to pay for their solution, their digital solutions or products. And so maybe the question is, what kind of ecosystem do we create for our entrepreneurs to also target the people at the bottom of the pyramid who might not necessarily have the means to pay, but need to be onboarded into this digital economy? So I think that's where we need to focus more on, whether it's policymakers or others, to really think through that. In fact, I was reading where it showed that statistics of when your income levels are high, then the digital divide is, the gap becomes less. Because currently on the continent, what you'll find is that people are paying 5.5% of their monthly income for internet services. Now, people are going to channel that 5.5% to other things that are deemed as basic needs before they start to think about internet. They'll think about healthcare, they'll think about education. And so the question then becomes, how do we create affordable digital products and services for those people at the bottom of the pyramid that would not necessarily be able to afford to be part of that ecosystem that we are creating.
That's exactly right, and I think that's the core issue, and I think Gita brought this up on her panel, which is, if we're thinking about true inclusivity, and we're talking about access to technology, digital divides, and the power that technology can bring in terms of sustainable development across sectors, what are we really doing to ensure that the private sector, the government, universities are bringing forward the importance of inclusivity and tackling the base of the pyramid? I'm not sure we're there yet. And I know that my business school is not there. I'm not sure about IE, but I know that we're falling short, and I know that the private sector in the Middle East falls short.
Can we give a suggestion?
Dina,
Absolutely.
I can tell you that most of our students now, I mean, we have a very diverse class, students coming from 150 countries, and most of them are thinking on building business for the base of the pyramid, for providing services, tackling these problems. I mean, simply because the huge opportunity is there.
But also many of those are branded as, many times are branded as social impact entrepreneurs. And many of the times you'll find that over time their business models become less sustainable. And so there's no mechanism of making sure you have a sustainable way of keeping these people fully engaged in this agenda.
So just to speak to that point, I just want to share an experience. We partnered.
I don't think your mic is, yeah.
Is it working? So we partnered with one or two.
No, it's not working.
Hello?
There is a debate in the technology used in this panel.
There it is, it's working.
I was just going to share an experience. We partnered with a government institution to launch a hackathon to get to incentivize developers to solve community problems. So people in the community, we give them a challenge, find a problem, and then come up with a solution. Now, what that did was to address some of the issues that were raised here. How do we actually get solutions to those issues that are not commercially viable, okay, but obviously going to solve social problems? And in the 2 runs that we did, I mean, clearly it's still a small scale, but I think if we have many of these initiatives, it all adds up. We found that it had quite a lot of impact. So, the minister might want to consider that in Rwanda, because it's worked well for us in Nigeria.
Mauro, you want to make a quick comment, and then we're going to open up the floor for...
I think this, I'm not sure I agree with you, because this may be true in the way we use capital today. But we are creating, with technology again, new ways to creating capital. So crowdfunding, using cryptocurrency and blockchain or not, last year raised more money than all the VCs together. And all these businesses are using different business models, and the cost of transaction is so smaller compared to banking that you can create different sustainable business models. And yes, there's still a lot of maybe prejudice or some hesitation on these business models, but they are coming and they are going to take over. And like I'm very optimistic also on that.
Absolutely, we have more tools than ever. I mean, coming back to the hackathons, we organized from a university a startup contest in partnership with the government of Panama called H2O Challenge. Because they're investing heavily in providing infrastructure to main cities of Panama. But I mean, they have a huge problem in bringing safe water to small communities, rural communities. So what they did is simply inviting entrepreneurs from all over the world to provide solutions and financing the proof of concept. So even governments are leveraging on entrepreneurship and on entrepreneurs, no matter if they call them social or not, but for solving problems, real problems of real people.
Yeah. Well, I hope that is the future of all business models. I'm optimistic, or let's say I'm very hopeful, not fully optimistic yet. We would need to change the, yes. Fair. So I have one last question, and then I'd like to open it up to the audience, because Shahid, you said something outside that I thought that has kind of stayed with me. As we're talking about the digital divide and lack of access, there's also a problem of over-access. And what happens within areas like urban centers where everyone has access to technology. I'd love to hear your thoughts, anybody who would love to offer thoughts on how do we create a balance where everyone has access, but we're not suffering from some of the negative impacts of over-access, because we know that those exist, and we see a lot of other issues coming from over-access to technology, such as depression, lack of true human connectivity between our young people. And as a result, we're seeing a lot of universities introduce courses on well-being and happiness, and this happened at Yale. So would love to hear your thoughts on that before we open it up to the audience for questions.
Yeah, I'll go back to what I was trying, and I can sort of connect the dots there. It's basically nobody's stopping technology. So it's doubling every 12 months and 18 months. So we have more storage, more bandwidth, more everything, and we're connecting more people. So at any given time, there are 3.5 billion people, and today, out of the 3.5 billion people are connected socially on the social media platforms. And we've already seen that companies like Google, Amazon, and the big fours are doing human profiling in such a way that they are enticing you to start thinking in that way. And this becomes then the million-dollar question is, which digital divide are we talking about? Are we talking about the digital divide where so much access that was not available is now as a profiled access? Companies like Alibaba are moving at year-on-year 40% growth. By 2030, they will be a $1 trillion company and the 5th largest economy in the world. And they do not own any assets. They own the 2 billion people that they will have as on their database as buyers and their profile. While we had Facebooks and Instagrams and the others, this is where the future economy of the world is moving, and how do you address that? The thing that I was talking to you was, I have it as a rule with my grandchildren that they cannot use their iPad or their phones while they are with me for 2 hours in the day, because how do you even communicate with them? Because they're like, he's too boring. The human attention span has gone below the goldfish, below 9 seconds. So how do you communicate to these people? So I would take digital divide in the other way, that there are the urban centers where there is excessive, and because technology is doubling, there is enough technology out there. Like if UAE is going to be the first country in the world with 5G, what will they do with their 4G? They can throw that kit and bring that kit. Now, 4G, when you compare it with the analog phones that we had in the 90s, it is a tremendous leap forward. So the digital divide has to be addressed by governments in a fashion that it has to be a mandatory requirement in all policy planning. If you want to push health, health cannot move if you don't have the right data, and you don't have how do you control the epidemics that we were talking about in the morning. If it is energy, it has got to be efficient, it has got to be things, and so on and so forth. All of this, when you put it together, that's where the planning departments of every government need to give more powers or bring insight that where will technology be in 20 years? How do we adopt it in every plan, and thus use it for effectively addressing the depleted Earth's resources and developing individual skill sets so that we have that 3 billion self-employed people equipped with the right tools. That's where we need to go.
Yep, absolutely. And on that note, I'd love to open it up to questions from the audience. I think we'll take all the questions in one go, and then we'll have the panelists respond. Okay, over here.
I'd just like to raise the issue. I'm Teddy Totime from Ghana. I'd just like to raise the issue of the digital divide in the health sector. Over the last 6 years, I've had to be shuttling in between Ghana and outside Ghana just because of training. And one of the things that it's striking every time you leave my environment and go into a more developed environment is how data is stored. Health data. In terms of, first of all, the raw clinical data that the doctor receives, how it is stored, how it's administered. And, I keep shuttling between an environment where on a daily basis we hemorrhage data in my teaching hospital back at home because we let patients go home with their folders, for example, because it's stored on paper. And then the hospital runs out of space for keeping the folders. And so then patients end up taking their data home. And that means that when you, the doctor, want to do research, you don't have these folders available. And that is how we end up not publishing as much as the rest of the world is publishing. I mean, compared to an environment where everything is stored on the hospital's big hard drive, it's almost limitless storage now. You want data on any disease, you can get it at the touch of a button. So the thing is, I also think that the digital divide has to be seen from that institutional gap, just because, I don't know, maybe it's because we haven't invested as much into healthcare as we should have. And the other thing is also patient privacy. Whilst I've been sitting here, I've been receiving CT scans from home that I've had to make comments on. But WhatsApp has made it very easy for that to happen. But the thing is that it is not encrypted information. And these images are going to be left on my phone unless I delete them.
Yep. Great.
In more developed environments, that is almost a no-no.
Yes.
And so what can we do for medical records on our continent and also patient privacy?
Excellent questions. Assuming you. We're going to take a few more. There is a question over here. Young lady from Kenya, I believe.
Yeah, my name is Susan, youth delegate from Kenya. Mine may sound like a silly question, but how do we regulate when it comes to technology? For example, like how can it be regulated? Because it has harm, at the same time it has benefit. For example, if I'm in Facebook, I have been to be given maybe 4 hours, then they shut down. For example, parents are not having time with their children. It is like everybody is busy in the social media. The children are there trying to get attention from their parents, but all of them are busy there. So is there a way that it can be regulated? Many of the youth don't get information from their parents because parents don't have time for them. So they go for this information in the wrong place, where nobody is going to direct them the right way of getting those information. So they get it the wrong way. So how do we regulate this?
Thank you. And there's behind, and then we'll come to you over here.
So great. Because it's a conversation, I want to put a bit of politics in the room. So we talk about access and sometimes over-access, right? And we've seen a pattern of areas that have conflict. And we know that, like I think Shahid said, or a panel this morning, we have a huge youth bulge. And it's coming along with technology. So what we did not know in our own generation, the youth is quite active. They're on social media, they're on Instagram. They know a lot of things that we don't know. But what we have also seen, and that's where my question comes in, is that we've seen a situation in Sudan recently with what is happening, and the internet is shut down because of the issue of security, that people might be so active on Facebook and all of that, and information is passed out. In my own country, we had a protest a few days ago. Again, the internet was shut down. So the kind of feedback I want to get is that, how do we also educate government that there's an issue of right to information, as well as the fact that things need to be regulated, but again, information needs to be shared when it's necessary. What can we do?
Yep,
yeah,
got it.
Striking a balance between the both.
Okay, and then we'll have one question here, and I think you can be our last one.
Thank you very much. My name is Temi Etomi, Eisenhower Fellow from Nigeria. I'm very glad to be able to ask my mentor and someone who's an early supporter of my work, Mrs. Odunfa, a very, very selfish question from the Nigerian perspective. Now, one of the reasons I'm grateful to be part of the Eisenhower Fellowship family is that there's a lot of de-emphasis on government and the role that government can play in creating solutions to the problems that pervade our continent. And on the in that light, I'd like to ask if you are aware, because you mentioned some of the infrastructure deficits that we're facing in our country, if you're aware of any private sector-led investment drives to bridge the digital divides across the continent. Are there models that we can copy? Can we replicate any models? And more importantly, how can private sector lead the charge to bridging this divide? As a corollary to that, I think you want to talk to Samaela, who's also my fellow, who might be able to help with some financing. I think we should be speaking practical terms now, if possible. Thank you.
Okay, and one last question, and then we'll hand it back over to the panelists over here in the back.
Hi, thank you so much for the panel for a wonderful discussion. And I'm glad that we are talking about digital divide. My name is Sylvia Macario. I'm based here in Rwanda, and I happen to run an organization that is actually disrupting and contributing that to the future of work, and also trying to create products that bridge the gap, whereby we are trying to make sure that the digital divide it's narrowed. But then I want to understand from your different respective countries, how you're making sure that, for example, we are creating a platform that is trying to translate the web to the local African languages. But the problem is there's no digital content on local African languages. I just want to hear from your different respective countries how the governments are providing that digital content in local languages. And because we need to understand that languages are a very key player in creating that digital divide. If I don't speak English, I cannot access the web because I don't understand English. So how do we ensure inclusivity in that sense? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So we have a question on health data and privacy, and I'm looking towards you because I know this is the core of your work.
Thank you. On health data, storage essentially is what you were talking about. I think we have an opportunity today because storage has probably never been cheaper, but you probably need some kind of public-private sector partnership. I don't know if you work for government or private sector, but I know specifically in Ghana, for example, there's a big initiative from NITA on a data center and storage. You can also look at cloud storage, because really today, storage shouldn't be a limitation for you at all. You know, you talk about other environments that you go to and you see that they can store a lot. You really shouldn't be talking about removable media anymore, because you have access to cloud storage if you have the right governance around it, or you can have a collaboration with your Ministry of Comstech and go to NIDA. They just built a data center, and I'm sure that you can work something out with them. You know, on the privacy side, I had alluded to it earlier, that is something we need to take up. Now, specific to Ghana again, I know that Ghana already has a Ghana Data Protection Act. I think it's still in discussion, it's being formulated, so it's a good time to go to them and say, how about the health sector? I know they've had a number of parleys with the financial services sector. That is where everybody seems to look to. But I mean, you're in a very real sector. I don't know if you've engaged them, because this is a time to make sure that the concerns of the health sector are reflected in that act. You know, and I alluded earlier on that for me, beyond, it's good to have those country-specific acts, but it would be nice to see, even on an Africa-wide basis, what our stance is on the privacy, and this is a very sensitive area, health. But privacy generally is not something that we pay attention to. And if we don't pay attention to it today, it'll come back to bite us very, very soon, you know. So my own response to you will be engage in your community. We can talk after this, and I can see how I can help you take that forward. Can I just also say something about,
you want to answer?
Yes, the question on access. Is there private sector investment? Actually, there's quite a lot. So I mentioned that there are about 5 submarine cables at the shore in Nigeria. One of them is from Main 1. One of them is from MTN, one of them is from Glo, and there are 2 others. These are private sector investors. In fact, I think it's only one, the one from Intel, that is public sector led. So they've made the investment. I think the challenge for them now is to again see how, I mean, some of the challenges they face are not, they're difficult to address private sector wise only. So electricity is a problem, last mile access. They're faced with security problems. You're trying to lay cables. They're faced with challenges going from one state to the other, which is a real problem if you're trying to get to the rural community. So what you find is that a lot of that capacity just remains in the urban centers because it's easier to get to. They're challenged with vandalism. So those are issues that you probably need government intervention to weigh in on to address. Private sector essentially when they do it themselves, it leads to the cost of the service to the end user going astronomically high. So there is quite a lot of private sector investment there because I think the telecom sector for Nigeria is so important. As a contributor to GDP, it's ranged between 8 to 10% over the last few years. And so it can really unleash the potential. We also have a huge youth population, 70% under 35 years of age. If they had access to these tools, it can do so much more for them. It really has strong potential. I think in recent years, though, not to get political, but in recent years, we haven't had as much focus on that whole sector as we had in the past. And that clearly has helped us to lose steam somewhat.
Do you want to tackle the digital content while you have the mic?
On the languages?
The last question, yeah.
No, she was talking to governments. I don't work for government.
All right.
Thank you.
Okay, Juan, and then we'll give the mic to the minister.
About digital content, I think that translators are improving dramatically and including more and more languages. But I will tell you what I did, what I was involved 15 years ago when I was a member of a government, which was promoting bilingualism in schools. And I live in a country which language is Spanish, which is one of the most spoken languages in the world, and we could think that we could communicate with anyone else. But what we did is making sure that every children learns English as Spanish.
Mm-hmm. Minister?
Yeah, so I wanted to, maybe I'll start with the question on the digital divide in the health sector. And pretty much many of my answers are going to revolve around the issue of digital literacy. I know we talked a lot about access as one of the key drivers for bridging that digital gap, but I think digital literacy is a very huge aspect of that. And just to respond to you, I know she talked about storage, so I'll not go back to that. I think when you look at the healthcare records, to a large extent, there's been a large evolution of the kind of technologies that can be used from very basic electronic medical records to sophisticated ones that can really be used to make sure that the ease of sharing medical records, but also safeguarding it is maintained. And I think what needs to be done, given just your example, is really creating that awareness and sensitization. And that really brings me also to the question. I know a lot of what we've discussed here on the panel around the digital divide is more around our jurisdictions, looking at the different demographics where the digital divide is very prevalent. But I think over time, what we're going to experience as a continent is a digital divide with other continents where we've largely become consumers. And comes back to your question when we talked about entrepreneurs, how do we groom entrepreneurs that are actually going to be creators of these digital technologies and solutions? And so I think when it comes to healthcare, there's just so much out there in terms of moving away from paper medical records into electronic health records and secure means of sharing those health records and safeguarding the privacy of patient data. The more sophisticated ones that are being looked into is even the use of distributed ledger technologies to store electronic health records. And that not only is a safe way of storing health records, but also gives the patient control over the information and who they give access to for their kind of patient data. And so I think there's a whole range of things that can be done, and I think as developing countries, the technologies exist, it's just a matter of deciding what is a good fit for the kind of challenges that you're trying to solve. Then there was a question around regulating technology. And as a continent that has a very youthful and growing population, I think some of the things that we're going to be very deliberate about, and Rwanda is already doing that, is putting in place child online protection policies. So that even the way children or our youth are transacting online is in a safe environment. That is really a very basic starting point. The other thing is, it's almost like saying, people have cars. Do you regulate how far they drive or how often they drive? Or you have food, when do you decide how much you have to eat or not? I think it's a similar concept to this. Even technology, there has to be a discipline, there has to be boundaries, and those are things, those are values that you get to create over time. The third question was around educating government on the right to information. I can't agree more. I think governments have a whole wealth of data that can be used by different entrepreneurs and innovators to create new business models, new, new services, new products. And open data is the thing that every government should be embracing, to open up these data sets in a way that, of course, you can't trace back to the owners of the data, but at least how do you aggregate it and then provide it to the different people that are creating those revolutionary business models. The other question was around the private sector-led efforts to bridge the gap, and I'll not repeat what you said. When it comes to access, we see a lot of private sector investment when it comes to that. A case for Rwanda is that out of the 9,000 kilometers of fiber optic cable, government probably only put in 2,500, which was just the backbone, and then all the private operators are doing the last mile. Solutions to make sure that you have, schools, hospitals, individuals, households connected to the internet. And I think to a large extent, the private sector is heavily involved in really bridging the digital divide when it comes to bridging access. But there are other elements where we need to see the private sector coming in very strongly when it comes to building the digital literacy levels, because as we build all these services and products, how do we ensure that our consumers are capable to even, make use of these products and services? When it comes to content, government can't be the only content creator. Even the private sector, how do you create this content that is relevant and is going to drive traffic uptake on these infrastructure investments that we've made? And also when it comes to devices, at the end of the day, it's the private sector that is putting these devices at the disposal of the people. How do we make it more affordable? How do we come up with very attractive models of financing so that people can have access to these smart devices? And the last question was around digital content in local languages. I'll just use an example for Rwanda. I think for us, the very first step was to say, as a government that had made that deliberate effort to put all our services online, it was important that the services are in 3 languages, English, French, and Kinyarwanda, the local language, because different people are going to need to interact with this government online platform. How do you ensure that everyone that wants to get this access to these services is able to do it in a language that they feel very comfortable with? And we're seeing a lot of that even happening on the private sector, where the private companies that are putting their services online, also it's almost like a rule, everyone has their services in these 3 languages and making it more accessible for the citizens.
Wonderful. Shahid, Mauro, do you have any other comments to any of the questions that were posed? Or Juan?
No, I think I can just give you from experience on the health sector a little more to be conscious, because we've been doing this experiment in Pakistan, and the legislation doesn't come just on the technology side, it also comes in the regulation on the hospitals. Because whenever I was asked about speaking on cybersecurity, in our part of the world, which is Asia and Africa, I tell people that the first thing we need to do is talk about digital pushback. Because digital pushback is translated in, when you have everything digitized, you have forensics on it. And that is something that our governments and our society is not ready, because it starts opening up a completely new Pandora's box, because it addresses from malpractice to corruption to everything else, because there is an evidence base. So there is a very serious pushback that you will see happening, that people do not want to digitize, may it be the police, the law enforcement agencies, or hospitals. I've seen that in the hospital sector, very serious pushback. The other area which I think was a question on how do we legislate. The fortunate part is that we belong to that part of the world where we are in the infancy of using digital technologies, by virtue of which, if you look at the European Union, they have legislated this thing to a very different level. Now, the challenge that we have, and this is with our legal community and our local cultures and languages, and this is the disconnect that we have. Even though technology I can predict this today. In 5 years, I don't think we will be needing to worry about languages, because you will have an app on this, which you will have a Bluetooth earphone, and you can talk in any language, and they'll automatically off the fly translating. And I have been using it. So it's not something that I'm talking about. I recently was in Germany, and my driver was Italian, and we were having a great conversation because he didn't speak a word of English, I didn't speak a word of Italian, but we spoke to each other, and it was just a device.
Through an app.
Yeah, it's through an app. So that's going to happen. But once that happens, this is where your next challenge is. The challenge is that you've got to understand the local cultures to incorporate the legislation that has been drafted already and is being used, because it constantly needs updating. Because, like I said, technology is moving at 12 months. The humans culturally are not understanding on how to absorb that. Now, this is a task that goes to exactly everyone. My first visit ever to Africa, this part of the world, I'm just looking at how everybody thinks, behaves. So it's a learning curve. Technology will allow you to go through that curve very fast, but there is no way that I can ever think like somebody from Rwanda or somebody from Africa being brought up in Asia or in Pakistan. So this is where I think not only do you need the legislation, but you need to incorporate the local culture and ethics within the enforcement of the legislation.
Yeah.
Then only will you see success.
Excellent point. So just to wrap up, do you want to make a quick point, Mauro?
I'll try to make quick, which means I'm just going to seed the confusion. The problem of healthcare just calls my attention to other problems. So there's a digital divide in which industries are digitized and which are not. Agriculture, for example, has a huge space for digitization. So still the technology is there. I think more than the storage cost, we have the capturing cost. So like translating the information from the analytical to digital. But still, there's already the technology. Like you can take the EGE information direct to the computer. You don't need, to print it on paper and to store it. So there's this cost and this technology gap to bring this information direct to digital. Then I think people are still afraid that they won't be able to deal with all this data. And this is where I'm not optimistic. We won't be able to deal with this data. Our brain is still our brain of 1 million years ago, and it's not going to change. So we always will have a conflict with the artificial intelligence telling us, do this because I processed all the data that is available in the world for everyone, and you should be do this. And then the politicians are, no, I think it's better to do that. Or, or people, or our parents. So I remember something from my fellowship, which is like, don't try to organize chaos. You have to embrace it. And that's it. We are still not ready to embrace chaos, but that's what we have to do.
But we're more and more embracing technology. So I think I just want to ask, just to wrap up and end on a very positive note, I think we can all agree that bridging the digital divide is extremely important to Africa and all of the current growth markets. So I would just like to end with each of you saying, what are you most excited or hopeful about in this upcoming phase when it comes to technology and innovation and the promise that it might have for Africa as a continent or for your own region?
I'll probably start. So I think for me, it's not a question of whether or not technology can truly transform, the continent and some of our very traditional industries. There's no question about that. The question is the how. And maybe it could have been a good thing to discuss if we had more time, was to even think about how do we measure the digital divide? Because I don't think there's a very unified metric of how economies measure the digital divide and how they're bridging that gap. But also thinking about how, emerging and upcoming technologies are going to even widen that gap further, and what do we do now to make sure that the efforts that we're making today to make sure that there's inclusive access to digital infrastructure, to platforms, to services, digital literacy levels are built, so that we don't make sure that 20 years from now, we're having this same discussion because we're talking about a different set of technologies.
You're always excited, I know.
Yeah. To finish in a positive way, I think that technology will help take things that are not really important out of our hands. So maybe all this anxiety is because we are trying to make decisions that we are also not made to. The day we decide to let technology do this, we'll be able to do what he just did. You know, when you take the language out of the equation, you can have a conversation with the Italian guy, you know, like, and enjoy life and learn about our cultures and everything. So if we learn how to let technology do what can do better than us, then we can, you know, go back to the human aspect of it, which is going to be so nice.
Juan.
So I started optimistic, and I'm going to finish optimistic as well. Okay. So Africa has not participated in any of the industrial revolutions that had taken place in the last 2 centuries. You know, but this is a chance, and Professor Grace will explain it tomorrow much better than me. This is a chance to catch up, not to miss this opportunity. The revolution is already taking place, and developing policies such as the ones the Rwanda government are deploying, granting access to technologies and spreading knowledge are the path to really enable people to participate in this big revolution.
Well, I'm being a technologist. I love technology, so there's no worry really when I talk about from the aspect that is being where anxiety comes in. So where we are with all the advancements in artificial intelligence, the only thing that humans have achieved till date is to map a rat's brain. All the AI today, the best thing it can do is map a rat's brain. So human brain is a different phenomena, and the human body is a completely different phenomena. 1 gram of human DNA in today's technology can store 8 terabytes of data. 1 gram of human at body temperature. So we are walking storage devices. Yes. It's just a question. It's a question of how we apply them. So there's no worry. We'll have all the digital.
Leave it to you to.
For me, I believe technology is clearly a game changer. For Africa, I think it really, you know, we use these words lightly, but it really can help us close the gap. It really can help us level the gap that we find that we face. I believe that working towards closing this digital divide will unleash the potential of Africa as entrepreneurs, in the healthcare, in education, in every sphere. It is that one area that can enable us leapfrog and really show what we're capable of as Africans. And so we should embrace it, and we should collaborate and cooperate to make sure that as much as possible, every African has the opportunity to have these tools, this access in their hands to make their lives better, to make the world better.
Well, some of the women that I've seen today are in leadership positions in Africa. I'm quite optimistic myself about where the continent will be going. So thank you all for your patience, and I'm sure everyone is ready to go get your cocktails. And Minister, thank you. I know that you...
I wanted to say something.
Please.
Having taken the first shot at speaking, I don't want to leave as the less optimistic person on this panel. So I think one thing, as everyone was speaking, that I realized that probably we need to leave excited about is the fact that Africa doesn't have legacy systems in place means we have an opportunity to leapfrog and be front runners when it comes to this technology race.
Absolutely, absolutely, agreed. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much to the panel. A big round of applause for them. I think you need to go out and get an official photograph taken. But I just want to make a quick announcement on this evening. You can all go upstairs for a quick drink. Some people are ready for their drinks. I meant that in the nicest way. But buses will be available from 9 p.m. to start shuttling people back to your hotels. So cocktails, then dinner, upstairs. Sorry? Same location. So cocktails, dinner, same location. But transport will be provided back to the hotels if you're going to stay and if you're ready to leave at 9 o'clock. Tomorrow is a half day. In case you haven't had a good chance to look at the program, tomorrow is a half day. But there's excursion tours in the afternoon, and then there is a night out in Kigali. So if you would like to register for the excursion tours, tomorrow there are 2 locations, the shopping tour and the genocide tour, the Genocide Memorial Center. So the Genocide Memorial Center and the shopping tour. So you'd need to register for those in advance so that you're dropped off and then buses will drop you back at the hotel at 4 o'clock. So just some planning for you as you get ready for tomorrow's session. But for now, drinks time. Have a wonderful evening and we'll see you tomorrow.